My name is Grace Lawson. I am 29 years old. And the last thing my mother ever placed in my hands was a small gold ring with a single oval sapphire set in a simple four-prong setting. She gave it to me 3 weeks before she died. We were in her hospital room in Nashville, Tennessee, and the afternoon light was coming through the window the way it does in October, low and golden and already thinking about leaving. She took my hand and pressed the ring into my palm and closed my fingers around it. She said, "This is yours. Always." She died on a Saturday morning in November. I was 21 years old. I kept the ring in the small velvet box it had come in the top drawer of my nightstand, for 8 years. I did not wear it. It was too important to wear, too irreplaceable, too much the specific weight of something that cannot be replaced once lost. I kept it the way you keep the things that are most precious, carefully, privately, aware of them even when you are not looking directly at them. And then on a Christmas morning 8 years after my mother pressed it into my hands and told me it was mine always, I sat in the living room of my father's house in Nashville and watched my stepsister Brooke unwrap a small box tied with gold ribbon. She pulled the ribbon. She lifted the lid. She held up her hand so everyone could see what was inside. It was my mother's ring. I could not breathe. The room seemed to tilt slightly. The Christmas tree, the wrapping paper on the floor, the faces of the relatives arranged around the living room all tilted with it, like a photograph that has been lifted off level. I looked at my stepmother, Diane. She was watching me. She had been watching me, I understood in that moment, since the moment Brooke started opening the box. She had been waiting for my reaction. Her expression was not guilty. It was the expression of someone who has made a decision and is standing behind it and would like the moment of confrontation to be brief. She shrugged. A single, deliberate shrug. She needed something special, she said. Her voice was light, calibrated for the room. It was just sitting there. Just sitting there. The room went quiet. Every relative, every cousin and aunt and family friend gathered in that living room on Christmas morning went still in the specific way of people who have just witnessed something they are not sure how to respond to. Some of them looked at me. Some of them looked away. Some of them looked at the floor. They were waiting for me to cry. I did not cry. I stood up slowly. I set down my coffee cup on the table beside the couch. I walked to the kitchen. And I made one phone call. By that evening, 2 people arrived at the front door of my father's house. Diane opened the door. Her face dropped. Her hands started shaking. What happened in that living room next left her completely speechless. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. My mother was a woman named Ellen Lawson. She was 44 years old when she died, too young by any measure, taken by a cancer that had been diagnosed 14 months before it finished what it started. She was a high school art teacher who had spent 20 years teaching teenagers that looking carefully at the world was a skill worth developing. She made her own jewelry on weekends. She grew tomatoes in the backyard with a commitment that bordered on professional. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which was one of the most endearing things about her, and also, if you were in a hurry, one of the most frustrating. The ring had been her mother's before it was hers. My grandmother, whom I had known only briefly before she passed when I was 7, had worn it every day of her adult life. When she died, she left it to my mother, who wore it on her right hand for 20 years. When she gave it to me in that hospital room in October, she told me its history. She told me about her own mother wearing it, and what it had meant, and what she wanted it to mean now that it was passing to me. She told me it was not valuable in any significant financial sense. The sapphire was small and the gold was modest, but that it carried something that financial value could not account for. "I want you to have something of mine that you can hold," she said. "Something real." I held it in my closed fist the whole drive home from the hospital. My father, to his credit, grieved my mother thoroughly and with the honesty of a man who does not know how to perform emotions he does not feel. He was lost without her for 2 full years. I worried about him during that time, drove from my apartment in Nashville to his house on weekends, called him regularly, did the things children do when they're watching a parent navigate loss. He met Diane 3 years after my mother died. She was pleasant on the surface, organized, socially confident, the kind of woman who fills a domestic space efficiently and makes everything look managed. She had a daughter, Brooke, who was 2 years younger than me and who had her mother's confidence and none of her efficiency. I had tried with Diane. I want to say that clearly, because it matters. I had not been hostile or territorial. I had made genuine effort over several years to build something workable with the woman my father had chosen, and to accept that his choosing her did not diminish what we had lost. These are things that adults do when they love their parents and understand that their parents' lives extend beyond the role of parent. But Diane had a quality that I noticed early, and that never changed over 6 years of her being in our household. She had a relationship with other people's things that did not fully account for the other people. Small things at first. A piece of my mother's pottery that had been on the kitchen shelf moved to a box in the garage because, Diane said, she was updating the kitchen aesthetic. Photographs rearranged. Objects relocated. Always with the brisk justification of household management. Always slightly too quickly for my father to track as a pattern rather than a series of individual decisions. I said nothing. Each time, I said nothing. I chose peace and my father's happiness and the long view. The ring was not a small thing. In the kitchen on Christmas morning, I called my mother's younger sister, my Aunt Patricia, who lived 40 minutes outside Nashville and who had been present in that hospital room the afternoon my mother gave me the ring. Patricia answered on the second ring. "Merry Christmas," she said. "I need you to come to Dad's house," I said. "Today. As soon as you can." She heard something in my voice that required no further explanation. She asked one question. What happened? I told her about the ring. There was a silence that was not long, but that contained a great deal. "I'll be there in an hour," she said. I said, "Bring Uncle David if he's with you." David was her husband, a quiet man who had spent 30 years as a family attorney before he retired. Another brief silence. "Grace," she said carefully, "do you want us to come as family, or is David coming in his professional capacity?" I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard my mother had grown tomatoes in. The garden beds were winter bare and gray. "Both," I said. I went back to the living room. The room had recovered its surface. Conversations had resumed. Someone had put Christmas music back on. The wrapping paper was being gathered from the floor. Brooke was wearing my mother's ring on her right hand and had moved on to looking at something on her phone. Diane was in the kitchen when I returned, arranging the appetizer trays with the focused energy of a woman who has decided the best response to a difficult moment is to become very busy. I sat back down on the couch. I picked up my coffee cup. I did not speak to Diane. I did not speak to Brooke. I waited. My father came and sat beside me after a few minutes. He was a perceptive man when he paid attention, and he paid attention to me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm going to need you to be in the living room at around 6 o'clock, I said. "Patricia is coming." He looked at me. He looked toward the kitchen where Diane was. He looked at Brooke's hand. He had seen the ring. He had seen it go by in the unwrapping, and he had, I realized, not made the connection immediately. It had been 8 years, and he had never been shown the ring directly in the way I had never held it or examined it closely. By the time he might have made the connection, the moment of the unwrapping was already past. But he made the connection now. I watched it happen across his face. He set down his glass and did not say anything for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know about this." "I know you didn't," I said. He nodded. He sat with me on the couch for a while without speaking, which was, for my father, a kind of answer. Patricia arrived at 5:50. Uncle David was with her. They came to the door in their coats, looking like exactly what they were. A woman who had loved her sister and a man who understood what legal documents meant. Diane opened the door because she was nearest to it. She looked at Patricia, whom she knew from family gatherings and had always managed with the careful warmth of a woman who understood which relatives required managing. Then she looked at David. Then she looked at Patricia again. Her face dropped in the way that the face drops when the body understands something before the mind has fully processed it. Her hands, which she was drying on a dish towel, went still. "Merry Christmas," Patricia said pleasantly. "Could we come in?" We gathered in the living room. My father sat in his usual chair. Diane sat on the edge of the couch with the dish towel still in her hands. Brooke, who had come in from the kitchen when she heard the door, stood near the entrance to the hallway with the expression of a young woman who has not yet understood the full dimensions of what is about to happen. David sat down, which is what retired family attorneys do when they want a room to understand that this is going to be a seated conversation. He looked at Brooke's hand, then at Diane. "I'll be brief," he said, with the economy of a man who has had many versions of this conversation over 30 years. The ring currently on Brooke's finger was personal property belonging to Ellen Lawson, who passed it to her daughter Grace on October 14th of 2015, documented by 3 witnesses present in the hospital room: myself, Patricia, and Ellen's attending nurse, whose name and contact information I have. Ellen's intention was unambiguous and explicitly stated in both verbal and written terms. The ring was included in her personal property documentation, a copy of which I have with me. He set a folder on the coffee table. Under Tennessee property law, he continued, the transfer of personal property with documented intent and witnesses constitutes a legally valid conveyance. The ring belongs to Grace. Its removal from her possession and transfer to a third party without her knowledge or consent constitutes conversion of personal property, which is a civil wrong. He said this without drama, without accusation in his tone, simply as information being delivered to people who needed it. Diane stared at the folder. Her hands had started shaking. Not violently, a fine tremor, the kind that happens when adrenaline arrives and has nowhere useful to go. "I didn't know about any documentation," she said. Her voice was careful and had lost its usual confidence. "I thought it was just an old ring that was in a drawer." "It was in a velvet box in Grace's nightstand," Patricia said. Her voice was not loud, but it was the voice of a woman who had been holding something since 5 o'clock in the afternoon and was now being allowed to say it. "In Grace's room. In this house." The room was completely quiet. Brooke looked at her mother. Then she looked at me. Then, without being asked, she slid the ring from her finger and held it out toward me. I crossed the room and took it. It was warm from her hand. I closed my fingers around it the way I had in my mother's hospital room 8 years ago, and the weight of it, small, modest, not valuable in any financial sense, was exactly what it had always been. "Everything," Diane said. "I didn't think it was." "Diane." My father's voice. Quiet and final. The voice he used when he had reached the end of something. "That's enough." She stopped. David and Patricia stayed for dinner. My father insisted, which I was grateful for. The meal was quiet but not unkind, quieter than Christmas dinners usually are, with the particular hush of a room where something has been resolved and the resolution is still settling. Diane ate very little. She did not speak much. She looked, for the first time in 6 years of knowing her, like a person who understood that she had done something that could not be repositioned or managed or explained away with the brisk efficiency she brought to everything else. Brooke, to her credit, apologized to me privately in the kitchen after dinner. She said she had not known the ring's history and that if she had, she would never have accepted it. I believed her. She was 27 years old and had been handed a gift by her mother and had not thought to ask the questions she should have asked. I understood that. I did not hold Brooke responsible for Diane's decision. I drove home that night with the velvet box in my coat pocket. I kept my hand on it most of the drive, the way you keep your hand on something when you have just gotten it back and want the physical confirmation that it is there. My mother placed that ring in my hands in a hospital room in October and told me it was mine always. She was right. It was. Even when I did not have it in my hands, it was mine. Because what she gave me in that room was not only an object. It was the specific and irreplaceable knowledge that I was loved by her in the particular and complete way that only a mother can love a child, fully, finally, without reservation, right up to the very end. No one can give that away. No one can find it in a drawer and decide it is just sitting there. It is not the kind of thing that sits. It travels with you. It waits in your pocket. It closes warm in your fist. It is yours. Always. That is what she said. She was never wrong about anything that mattered.